Hello, and welcome to the first episode of What Connects, a new series exploring unexpected connections between historic places, people, and artefacts. Today's episode comes to you from the historic city of York. York is famous around the world for its historic architecture. The most famous building of all is the legendary York Minster. With its central tower 235 feet high, that's about 72 metres, it dominates the landscape for miles around. The present structure took more than 200 years to build. It was consecrated in 1472, and it's been attracting visitors ever since. In 2022, more than 600,000 people passed through its doors. York is also famous for its railway heritage. On the other side of town, at the National Railway Museum, you can find one of the most famous railway locomotives ever built, Mallard, the world's fastest steam locomotive. Mallard was built by the London and North Eastern Railway at Doncaster Works in 1938. She was part of a new generation of streamlined express locomotives designed to help the railways fight back against increasing competition from road and air transport. Britain's leading railway companies were competing with each other to show the public just how fast their new engines could go. On the 3rd of July 1938, Mallard made a specially arranged test run down Stoke Bank, just south of Grantham. She briefly touched a speed of 126 miles per hour, thus setting a speed record which stands to this day. After this moment of glory, Mallard settled down to an ordinary life, pulling express trains on the East Coast Main Line between London and Edinburgh. It would have regularly passed through York Station, but this was never its home city. It was initially based at Doncaster Locomotive Shed, later moving to Grantham, and finally London King's Cross, and this remained its home depot until it was withdrawn from service in 1963. Mallard only moved to York when the National Railway Museum opened in 1975. However, there is an object at York Minster which has a powerful connection to Mallard. And, whilst the Minster itself is pretty hard to miss, this is an object which you might not have noticed. This sundial stands on College Green, just a few metres away from the east end of York Minster. It's designed in a classical style. It's built around a fluted Doric column with a ball finial and 4 sculpted lions around the base. Now, the classical style was very popular through the 18th century, and indeed this sundial was made in 1730. And I expect most people who walk past it probably assume that it's always been here. But in fact, it's only stood on this site since 1955. Originally, it stood more than 100 miles from here, in the grounds of a country house called Drakelow Hall, near Burton-on-Trent. We don't know exactly when Drakelow Hall was first built. The building had an Elizabethan character, but, like many country houses, it underwent many alterations over the years. Perhaps its most remarkable feature was its dining room. In the 18th century, this was decorated with an extraordinary series of landscape murals painted by Paul Sandby. These murals were embellished with trellis work to create the illusion of an outdoor space. But what's Drakelow Hall got to do with Mallard? Well, for centuries, Drakelow was the seat of the Gresley family. The Gresleys could trace their lineage back to the Norman conquest, and their ancestors already owned the manor of Drakelow when the famous Domesday Book was written in 1086. In 1611, George Gresley of Drakelow was created a baronet. In 1847, the hall was inherited by Sir William Nigel Gresley, the 9th baronet. He died only 10 years later, and Drakelow then passed to his eldest son, Sir Thomas Gresley. But Sir William also had a second son, Nigel, and Nigel in turn had 4 children of his own. The youngest of these was one Herbert Nigel Gresley, born in 1876, although, just to confuse you, he too was usually known as Nigel. As a younger son of a younger son, Herbert Nigel had no prospect of inheriting land or wealth. He had to make his own way in the world. Fortunately, during his school days, young Nigel had shown an aptitude for mechanical engineering. In 1893, he began an apprenticeship at Crewe Works on the London and North Western Railway. It soon became apparent that Gresley possessed not only engineering skills, but also leadership and organisational abilities. His career progressed remarkably rapidly. In 1905, aged just 29, he was appointed carriage and wagon superintendent of the Great Northern Railway at Doncaster Works. Then, in 1911, he was promoted by the Great Northern to chief mechanical engineer. This meant that, among other things, Gresley had to oversee the design of new locomotives for the company. Now you can see where this is going, can't you? Gresley unveiled his first new locomotive design in 1912, and he went on to become one of the most famous and revered locomotive designers in history. He was recognised for his achievements with a knighthood in 1936. In 1923, the Great Northern was absorbed into the new London and North Eastern Railway, but Gresley kept his job, and he went on to produce some of the most famous steam locomotives of the interwar period. He designed such legendary locomotives as Flying Scotsman, Green Arrow, Cock of the North, and, you guessed it, Mallard. Sadly, by the time Mallard took to the rails in 1938, Drakelow Hall was no more. Having owned the site for almost 900 years, the Gresley family finally sold Drakelow in 1931. There was a scheme to save the house and turn it into a country club, but tragically this fell through, and the house was demolished in 1934. In the 1950s, Drakelow Power Station was built on the site. Fortunately, a few relics of the hall have survived. One of Sandby's dining room murals was salvaged and is now at the V&A in London. Our sundial was rescued by the Friends of York Minster and installed in York in 1955. Thus, by a quirk of fate, this relic of the Gresley family has ended up just a chime whistle away from Sir Nigel's greatest creation. And the sundial has another railway connection too. In 2021, the York Rotary Club sponsored the restoration of the sundial in order to commemorate their centenary. The inaugural meeting of the York Rotary Club was held in February 1921 at the Royal Station Hotel. Designed by the famous railway architect G.T. Andrews, this magnificent hotel was built specifically to cater for travellers on the East Coast Main Line, the route where Mallard and her sisters later worked. Opened in 1878, it's still going strong today, although it's now been renamed the Principal.
Do you know of any other places or people with unlikely historical connections? Then do leave a comment below, and who knows, maybe I'll feature them in a future episode. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, and I hope to see you for a future episode of What Connects.